Okay, so breakfast today has been brought to you by Whataburger. So what a breakfast, what a deal, what a thing. We love Whataburger, and we have a door prize for you. I think there's a free Whataburger in here as well. Hey, and Tal said we have plenty of breakfast out there, so if you want to take some to your employees or to your family, please do. If you got somebody that hasn't, have you seen the lines around the fast food restaurants? They're amazing because people are out of power. They can't cook. So please take some with you if you don't mind. Let's give it up for Humble Grounds for our free coffee. Thank you very much. Yep, you like that? And it says welcome officials. Yeah, okay, we did that. And any guests here today? Any guests? Anybody being a guest? Nope. Any brand new members in the chamber? Who's you pointing to? Are y'all guests? Brand new members? Well, one of you or both of you want to come down and say hello, and we'd love to introduce you. These are the fitness ladies. They're out there. Yes, here, I'll give you this right here. It's ready to go.
Hello. Oh, she left me. What happened here? All right, Erin Rayleigh, and we've got Katie here. So we're with Burn Boot Camp. We're right up 359 in Fulshear, and we do HIIT-style workout classes. Biggest probably perk is that we have Child Watch in there as well. So any kiddos, male and female, yeah, exactly, yeah, gives you a great opportunity to come in, especially if you've got that opportunity with your spouse. You can come in, drop the kiddos off, and get 45 minutes in. We kind of meet you where you're at, so all fitness levels are welcome. So.
8 weeks to 12 years old.
Yeah, 8 weeks to 12 years old is, and then at 13 they can join you on the floor. So, all right, here we go.
All right, give it up for. Here we are. That's going to be great. Oh, we have a guest. Hello. Nice to see you. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is McLean Sampson. I go by Dr. Sampson, I guess. I have been a professor at University of Houston since 2011, and I specialize in research about maternal health during pregnancy and postpartum. And through that journey, I have found that a lot of women struggle with self-confidence, finding their voice, learning how to trust themselves. And because of that, I'm actually pivoting into coaching. I know we have a couple other coaches here, and I call myself a mindset and empowerment coach because I love working with women to help them find their voice, trust themselves, build confidence, learn how to communicate directly to prevent things like postpartum depression, anxiety, and other things like that. So my business is Hear Me Roar Coaching. I have a lot of cards. I would love to share them, and I'd love to get cards from y'all as I'm trying to build my business. And I really appreciate your time, and thank you, Thomas Westbrook, for inviting me.
All right. Welcome, Doc. All right. That's fantastic. Also, out in the foyer, just so you know, if you afterwards, of course, you can go see Burn Boot Camp. Burn Boot Camp, not Burn Boots. So, okay. And Action Coach, Coach Hess is here. Where's Coach? There he is, Coach. And Electric Gas and Savings, he's not here today. He's out doing something, I forgot. Real-Time Pain Relief, Lightbridge Academy, and Beauty Freak. And, of course, Mr. Meyer will be out there, too, afterwards as well for any questions. Now, before we get started, we'd like to also give away some, remind everybody, we just had our 4th of July event. I don't know who out there went, but let me tell you, you weren't there? You were there, Gil. I don't know. You were there as well? Didn't see you. Okay. Well, probably couldn't see you because there was like 8,000 people out there. I mean, my gosh, we started downtown Fulshear. Then we said, well, it's too big. We got to go to the high school. So we went to Fulshear. Then we got to go to bigger high school. Julia went to Warrior Jordan High School. And so, okay, that's not enough room for parking. How about 68 acres out in Simonton and make it a regional thing? And by 8 o'clock, we had to shut the gates to the park because it was so full. And so next year we're going to do it at the park. Looks like we got the Spasmatics coming next year, so get there early and we're going to figure it all out. But we like to have fun and do some networking. Go to our website, FulshearRegional.com. That is now our new website. And we have our bowling tournament coming up. Get your team, Battle of the Businesses, the Bob. And you want to be the best business out there, get yourself one of those. Also, our new guide is available. There's Amy. Stand up, beautiful Amy. There you are. There she is. And She's our publisher of the guide. She's done a great job on it. I will say it was entered. Thank you. Yeah, round of applause. And the guide is really the best. They just keep getting better and better, Amy. They really do. And I submitted it for the Texas Chamber of Commerce executives, and I think they're just jealous of us because I know she won, but some other town like Lindell or something got best guide. And I looked at that and I go, really? Anyway, but we're proud of our guide, so we're going to submit it again next year. We're going to keep going. But we have won. We have won before, so I guess they just can't give it to us every year. Is that right? So, but it's a wonderful guide. Pick it up. Take one home with you, Ted. You'll love it. It's fantastic. And we got other events coming down the pike. Like I said, please go to our website. Check it out, and let me do this. We like to give away door prizes, then we leave it to Ted to finish us out. You good with that? All right, so here we go. Where's Mike? Mike Martin, what are you standing back there for? Oh, you got to be out there. Okay. There's our Navy veteran right there. He has rub it on, pain is gone, and if you win, Ted will rub it on for you. Now, first off, I want to say, put your cards in the bucket. Anybody see the biggest card in there? That's how you win. You see that? Like I'm going to reach in there and go, oh, hey. Okay, Cotty, where are we at? Come on up here. You get the pain thing. Come on, you win. I'm going to go ahead and make you win the pain thing. So here you are. Here, catch. And we're doing a rope cutting this Friday, right? Right here, guys, the cottage's co-working space. It's going to be a lot of fun. I know you got to get up and say something real quick, right? Why don't you do that real quick before I get all these prizes, and you can help me out on the prizes. This is Thomas. Thomas is going to tell us about something
Morning.
Really special.
Yes, perfect. All right. So wanted to announce something exciting. We are officially launching the Wellness Committee at the Fulshear Regional Chamber for Commerce. If you're wondering what that is, we're really looking to go into 2025 championing wellness in the workplace. How are we doing that? Well, one, the Chamber is putting on a Texas Heritage 5K, January 25th, 2025, on Texas Heritage Parkway. Super exciting. But we're also partnering with other chamber members that are doing wellness initiatives, such as Cross Creek West is putting on a 5K on October 19th. We have several wellness-based businesses in the chamber, and I'll be leading the charge in really making sure we put a spotlight on that. Applications are open to join the Wellness Committee. Would love to talk to you afterwards. I'll be out there in the lobby. If you're passionate about wellness, want to hear from you, want to connect with you, and super excited.
Wellness in the workplace, you bet. I tell you what, I was telling the ladies from Burn Boot Camp, we're like going to be the fittest town yeah, that's right. Hey, the mayor could declare us the fittest town in Texas, or we could do all kinds of stuff like that. All right, so, hey, here you go, Thomas. Don't sneak in there. Just open it up, and let's see who's going to win the Water Box. The Water Box, Newell's here. Oh, God. All right, here we go. Teresa Vigil, see, if you move down front, you win. See, I told you. If you were sitting back, your card wouldn't have come up. No. Okay, and here we have some, looks like candy. What's in that? Is it? Oh, this is from Quantum, right, Tal? Quantum. Oh, Tap Solutions. Yeah, these are freeze-dried Skittles. And have you ever had a freeze-dried Jolly Roger? These things are unbelievable. They don't break your... Is it... Oh, a Rancher. Jolly Rancher, not Jolly Roger. Arr! You know why they're called pirates, right? Because they are. How much do pirate earrings cost? A Buccaneer. I'm sorry, I have to do it. All right. Thomas Westbrook, congratulations. Yeah, all right. All right, Thomas. Funny how that worked out. Okay, well, here's some more. These things are really good. They don't break your teeth either. Yes. Show them the packaging. Show them yeah. See? And then put your company logo on there and everything. Good gifts, really. What are these? These are sour Mad Balls. These are like freeze-dried Skittles. So I'm sure they're... Hey, we're going to fatten you up before we thin you down, you know. But I tell you what. All right. Jennifer Hack. All right, Jennifer, congratulations. All right, and then we'll get to our speaker here. Coach Hess has his own book that's out. He's autographed these right here, and it's called Peak Experiences by Coach Hess. Coach, where you at? There he is. Stand up so everybody can see what you look like. I think we all know Coach, right? There he is, Coach. All right. We thank you for donating 2 books. We appreciate it, Coach. And, hey, the winner is Coach Hess. You won your own book. That's amazing. I don't know how this happens, but it does. I just noticed that Newell hasn't won anything yet. Ken Harris. Ken Harris. Oh, he already bought a book. I'm not putting your card back. The only thing I've got left to give away are the books. Hey, Ray Kurlick. Ray Kurlick. All right, Ray, congratulations. By the way, Ray, thank you for being one of our sponsors at the 4th of July. Fantastic. We love that. And, okay, here's our final book, and then we'll get to our speaker. Hey, you're not late. You're just not on time. No, just kidding. Michael Hack. You want the book? Look, you could eat your wife's candy while you're reading the book. Peak experience with the freeze-dried Skittles. There you are, Coach. All right. Thank you, Coach, very much. We appreciate it. And thank you all very much. Okay, we're going to get to our speaker. And I got to tell you, I don't know quite how I came across you, Ted. I don't know, was it John or somebody told me about you, right? And then I looked it up. And how many of you in here love baseball? I mean, really, especially, how many love baseball when the Astros are winning? Yeah? How many just tune in for the World Series? Yeah, there you go. But I love baseball, I love softball, and this is why it appealed to me. And many, many times there's a lot of metaphors in baseball that can apply to your life, your business, everything you do, even when you're dating, first base, right? Anyway, boy, that went right over their head. Am I that old? They don't use that anymore? Okay. Next. Okay, thank you, Tal. But anyway, let me introduce Ted Meyer. He's a highly rated labor and employment lawyer who represents organizations nationwide in matters relating to leadership and organizational excellence. He has counseled some of the largest employers in the world on how to improve their organizations and has done similar work on smaller teams and groups, including churches, nonprofits. Ted also is a self-taught baseball historian with a deep understanding and respect for the history of the game and the value of inclusiveness within. Ted has pursued both his passions side by side for over 30 years, and he has this book called Championing the Cause of Leadership, a look at the baseball dynasties. And I think it's a wonderful book. It'll be available, and he'll be out there to talk to you about it as well. So, Ted, before I get you started, I got a question for you. Are you ready for this? 7 ways to reach first base without scoring a hit.
Single.
No, that's a hit.
Oh, without a hit.
Without scoring a hit.
7, okay. Walk, hit by pitch, pass ball.
Fastball.
Not a balk. That's not.
Yeah.
Okay, balk.
You reach first base on the
Balk. All right. Catcher interference.
Very good. All right. 2 more.
I'm probably missing something obvious, aren't I? That's right. Pitch clock violation.
Oh, I didn't. Well, that's a new one. So now there's 8.
Yep.
I didn't think about pitch clock violation. Very good. Fielder's choice.
Okay.
Yeah,
yeah.
in the book.
Yeah.
And the one that always gets me is the pinch runner, the player who made it to
yes,
first base
okay.
without scoring it.
All right.
How about that, guys? So
That's
anyway,
great.
Let's give it up for
Thank
Ted.
you.
Enjoy it. Sorry
All right.
to put you on the spot.
Thank you
I had
very
to
much.
do it.
No problem. No problem. I love that stuff. All right. I've got to start with something weather related today before I get into what I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to first talk about Justin Verlander and how he got to Houston. in 2017. He's been here 7 years, if you can believe that. But in 2017, Jeff Luhnow was basically, for the entire season, was trying to get Justin Verlander from the Detroit Tigers. And he was negotiating with the Tigers, and there was the Detroit general manager, Al Avila, didn't want to do the deal because there was a certain prospect of the Astros that he wanted, and Luhnow would never give it up, and it went on and on and on into August. And the Astros had to go to California, so they were in Southern California in late August. Now, the rule is the deal has to get done by August 31st, or at least that was the date in that year. And it has to get to the commissioner's office by midnight that night. So this continued on. Luhnow went to California. He actually gave a speech to his nephew's baseball team, and he was on his cell phone negotiating the whole time. And it came down to about 7 o'clock in Southern California, which is 10 o'clock East Coast. He was in the shower 20 minutes before the deadline. He came out and he saw that the Avila had texted him, and he said, "We'll do the deal." So that was great, but there was one problem, is that Justin Verlander had a no-trade clause that he had to waive, and he had to do that in basically 15 minutes. Now, at this time, Justin Verlander was in Detroit having dinner with Kate Upton, planning their Italian wedding. And his head was somewhere else. He had actually been contacted by Dallas Keuchel with the Astros, who encouraged him to come to the Astros because he felt we were going to win a World Series. And so Verlander got the call about 15 minutes before the deadline, and they basically ran back to their their apartment, which is on the 4th floor of an apartment building in Detroit. They went up there, turned on the television set, and they were watching Hurricane Harvey hitting Houston at that very moment. And they were wondering, gee, can we even find a house if we go there? And Justin Verlander is furiously pacing in the apartment. And finally, Kate Upton says, "Just trust your gut. Justin, just trust your gut." And he said, "Okay, trust your gut. I'm going to do this." So it's like 2 minutes before the deadline. They go out to the elevator. They're on the 4th story, and the elevator's broken. And so they have to run down the stairs. Thankfully, the Tigers had sent a person over there with an iPad that Verlander could sign off on. And it literally got to the commissioner's office 2 seconds before midnight. And that's how we got Justin Verlander. But my question is, and for a free book, can anybody tell me who the prospect was that Luhnow did not want to give up and ultimately did not give up in that deal? Not Jordan. We got Jordan in a trade from the Dodgers. We fleeced him. Not Altuve. He was actually, Altuve had been there since 2013. Kyle Tucker, there you go. Free book for you. That's very rarely answered correctly. Yeah. So anyway, let me talk about my day job for a bit. I'm a management side labor and employment lawyer. What that means is I defend companies when they're sued by their current or former employees for a variety of things. So when they call me, they say, "Look, we want you to defend this lawsuit." And I say, "Okay," and we do that. But what they really want is to get to the bottom of what caused the problem in the first place. Now, oftentimes, there's really no legal liability. Sometimes we settle, sometimes we move forward to trial, we do a lot of things. But what the company really wants is to figure out what happened. Where did we go wrong? Where in leadership did we do the wrong thing? And that's usually the problem. Somebody somewhere didn't handle a situation or a conversation or a performance issue or whatever it was. They just didn't handle it the right way. And so that's what I help employers with. Now, when I was in law school, they told us you really got to find a hobby because this profession is extremely stressful and you have to have an outlet. And so I kind of found baseball history as my thing. And I started to read and learn and went to the Hall of Fame to study and met and talked to people. And I finally said, about 20 years ago, I finally said to myself, hey, there's a book in here somewhere. Because there were a lot of parallels between the great baseball teams and these companies that generally did well, but they had issues they had to overcome. And so I continued to think and work on this book and finally came up with really studying the baseball dynasties. the teams that are really, really good. And what's a dynasty? Well, you have to define your own dynasty. The question of whether the Astros are a dynasty is a tough one. I had a page limit from my publisher, so I had to come up with a rather restrictive dynasty test, which I came up with basically 4 factors. Number 1, you got to win back-to-back. That's the hardest thing to do in professional sports, but you got to win 2 years in a row. Number 2, you got to be really, really good for 4 or 5 years. Number 3, you got to be the best team of your time. You got to be the best team, generally regarded as the best team. And number 4, the historians of the era have to regard you as a dynasty. And so that's a pretty restrictive test. For those of you that know baseball, you're familiar with the Atlanta Braves in the 1990s that were a great team, Maddox and Glavine and Smoltz, but they never won 2 in a row. They got to the NLCS, National League Championship Series, 8 years in a row, and they were very, very good, but they never won 2 in a row, and they weren't the best team of their era. The Yankees were, because the Yankees beat them twice in the World Series, one time by a sweep. So you got to come up with a test for dynasties. But to really, the bigger question is, why baseball? What is it about baseball that resonates and really gives us kind of something to go by in addressing our problems in life? And the answer really is baseball is part of our hearts and it's part of our souls. Every one of you had something happen in your life at some point where somebody introduced you to baseball or softball. Whether it was a father, mother, grandfather, uncle, cousin, everybody has it somewhere. And the reason for that is that baseball has been in our culture for really over 200 years. I mean, there's evidence of a game with a bat and ball being played at Valley Forge. But it evolved through the 1800s. It's really a combination of cricket and town ball and rounders, which are a number of games that were played back then. It emerged as our game. And so in the early 1900s, for example, there was no TV, there was no internet, there was no radio. People played baseball, and everybody played baseball. There were town leagues, company leagues, prison leagues, church leagues, synagogue leagues. Everybody played, and pretty much that was how everybody spent their summer. They would go to the baseball games and watch. There was actually an amateur game in 1914 between the Hannah Cleaners and the Telling Strollers in Cleveland, Ohio, that drew 100,000 people. Amateur game. And that tells you just how popular baseball was. So these stories get passed down from generation to generation, and baseball, whether we know it or like it or not, is just part of us. And so when you go to a lunch or dinner with a client, and you're talking about a meeting or a presentation or something, and you say, hey, you really hit it out of the park. Or that idea was out of left field. Or you're really off base on that one. We know what that means. And I believe that connects people, sort of subconsciously. When you talk to somebody about baseball and you use this phraseology, there's that connection that you have with people that really is pretty magical, in my view. And it's really all because of baseball. So the dynasties. The first dynasty that I want to talk about in the book, and it was actually the last real dynasty under my test, was the New York Yankees in the late 1990s, 1996 through 2000. They won 4 out of 5 championships. And that was a team of Derek Jeter and Mariano Rivera, and they were very, very, very good for a number of years. But the real interesting story about that team is their manager, Joe Torre. Joe Torre had been a really good player in his day. He was actually the National League MVP in 1971. He played for a number of teams, but after he played, he became a manager, and he managed the Mets and the Braves and the Cardinals, 3 teams. But he was fired from each job. And his brother Frank was also a good baseball player and had played in the World Series. And Joe remembers going to watch his brother Frank playing in the World Series. And Joe's dream was to play in the World Series. But for those 3 years and during his playing time, he never went to the World Series. He's got the record for most games combined, played, and managed for somebody that didn't make it to the World Series, 4,742, and that's a lot of games. So in 1996, he's sort of handed this great team. George Steinbrenner hires him to manage the team, and in his first year, they go to the World Series. They make it. But there was something about Joe Torre that wasn't right, and his wife knew this. His wife came to him one day and she said, "Joe, there's something about you I don't know. There's something about you you're not sharing with me." As it turned out, Joe Torre's father abused his mother when he was young, and he could never talk about it. It was something that had bothered him his whole life. He would come home from school on his bike and he'd see his dad's vehicle in the driveway and he'd just keep going. He would just avoid it. And so his wife got Joe Torre to go to one of these married couple seminars in a Holiday Inn where people stand up and tell their private life to complete strangers. And Joe Torre did that at a time when people knew him. He was a public figure. And with tears streaming down his face, he told that story about his father. And that had affected him in a lot of ways. He never really learned how to confront. He didn't learn to have tough conversations. And these are skills that you absolutely have to have as a leader in business and certainly in baseball. So they get to the World Series in 1996, but they're staring the Atlanta Braves as their competitor. And they have the first two games in New York, and the Yankees lose the first one. They get beat by John Smoltz 10-1. After that game, the owner, George Steinbrenner, comes into Joe Torre's office and he says, "Better win the next one." And that's the way George Steinbrenner was. He was very confrontational and sometimes bullying. And Joe Torre looked up from his desk and he said, "George, you need to be prepared to lose game 2 as well. But after that, we're going to go back to Atlanta," which is my hometown, Joe said, "and we're going to win this World Series in 6 games." So sure enough, in game 2, they lost. They were shut out by Greg Maddux, 40-0. They were down 2-0 after playing in their own city, and they went to Atlanta. And in game 3, they got up 2-0 in the 6th inning. But the Braves had loaded the bases, and there was a batter coming up named Fred McGriff, who was an incredible hitter. And we all know these moments in these big playoff series where it's not inning 9 of the last game, but it's a huge time. It's a huge moment. Could change the series. And Joe Torre, with the crowd, on their feet, making a lot of noise, goes out to confront his pitcher, David Cone. And this is how it looked. That's Joe Torre. 36 is David Cone, the pitcher. That's Joe Torre right in his face there. That's Joe Girardi on the left. Jeter's on the right. And what Torre is saying here is he says, very simply, very directly, "I need the truth from you. This is very important. How do you feel?" Simple, short, declarative sentences. And Cone, the pitcher, said, "Oh, I'm good. I can get out of it. No problem." And you don't see this here, but Torre actually got closer to him, and their bills of their caps were overlapping. And he said it again. "I need the truth from you. This is very important. How do you feel?" And Cone and Torre locked eyes. Cone said it was the one thing today he remembers about Joe Torre, that moment. But they connected. And sure enough, Cone got the Yankees out of that inning, and the Yankees went on to win the World Series in 6 games. So it's one of those things, and this is what I find when I go out and speak to organizations, is a lot of times there's a senior leader that has something going on that is not just affecting that senior leader, but it's dragging down the entire organization. And that's what was happening with Joe Torre. Joe Torre couldn't have tough conversations. He couldn't confront. He couldn't deal with tough things. He would avoid it or just not really address it. And that's what happens in our business groups and our organizations, is that stuff just goes unresolved. And Joe Torre learned through this counseling to deal with that. And he went on again to win 4 or 5 World Series and is regarded today as certainly one of the top 10 baseball managers of all time, probably in the top 5. At age 55, he completely transformed himself as a leader because of dealing with a demon that had been with him his entire life. So that's one of the examples of how baseball dynasties can resonate for us, because people have these issues, whether it's not being able to confront or substance abuse or something that's going on, that if they address it, everybody gets better and everybody wins. So one of the things I did in this book, because it's hard to make comparisons over decades with baseball, because there were different teams, there's different eras, there's different rules. And as most of you probably know, men of color were systematically excluded from baseball until 1947, when Jackie Robinson came on the scene for the Dodgers. And so before then, there was a separate league called the Negro Leagues. That's the phrase they had at the time, was the Negro Leagues. And I studied the Negro Leagues, and I learned a whole lot because they played under tougher conditions. They would sometimes play 3 games a day in 3 different towns, traveling in old ramshackle buses between cities over country roads, and some of them wouldn't get any sleep, and they couldn't wash their uniforms, and nobody would give them a meal, and it was just awful. They played under these awful circumstances. But they were tough and they were good. Has anybody ever heard the name Oscar Charleston? Is that a name anybody knows? A few years ago, the historian Bill James did a list of the top 100 baseball players, and Oscar Charleston was rated 4th behind Babe Ruth, Willie Mays, and Honus Wagner. And Oscar Charleston was a Negro League player who was a great player and then became a great manager. But that shows you sort of how this talented group was just not even really known by the world or by the United States. But the thing I really learned and I used in baseball, and by the way, I grew up in a lily white town in Iowa, and my views of race were formed watching professional sports and watching men of color, men of different races play together and win and do well together. And the thing about all of this is it really ties into the diversity and inclusion issues of the day. And what I ultimately came to is that there's this thing in our organizations called groupthink. And groupthink means that when we're all alike, when we all come from the same place, we all look alike and similar in many ways, we all come up with the same solution to problems. And somebody comes up with an idea and everybody starts to shake their heads, and before you know it, that's the solution. There's nobody speaking up with another idea. But what I've learned is if you have true diversity and inclusion on that team, you have different people from different places, look differently, and have different life experiences, the solutions usually get better. So if there's a hurricane or there's a death in the organization, or whatever challenge you may be dealing with, having diversity on the team that solves the problem is a big plus. And so, but studying the Negro Leagues was fascinating. There was actually 3 teams that I really liked: the Kansas City Monarchs, the Pittsburgh Crawfords, and the Homestead Grays. And there was a time in the 1930s where 9 of the 100 players on that Bill James list played for one team called the Homestead Grays. So they were great, and they ultimately integrated, and they quickly became the stars of baseball: Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Roberto Clemente, and those players. So I'm asked when I'm out a lot, people ask me about leadership. They say, what's the best style of leadership? In baseball, for example, is it a tough manager? Is it a player's manager that sort of allows people to go their own way? And my answer to that always is, it's an authentic manager. It's a manager that is himself or herself. They're not trying to be somebody else. And the example I used for that was Casey Stengel. And Casey Stengel was an old manager who managed the Yankees in the late 1940s and 1950s. And Casey Stengel's thing was humor. And I think humor is very important. I think humor is critical for organizations. And Stengel would say things like, there comes a time in every man's life, and I've had plenty of them. That's the kind of stuff he'd say. One time he went out to the mound to take out a pitcher, and the pitchers would never want to come out of games, and the pitcher said, I'm not tired. And Stengel said, well, I'm tired of you. And out goes the pitcher. So another question I'm asked a lot is, what about chemistry, cohesiveness, getting along? How important is that in organizations? Well, it's not a bad thing, of course, but how important is it? And I turn to baseball and look at the early 1900s Chicago Cubs between 1906 and 1910, maybe the best team of all time. And they had the famous double play combination of Tinkers to Evers to Chance. That used to be taught in public schools back in the day. Joe Tinker was a shortstop. Johnny Evers was the second baseman. One day in 1906, they got in a fight between the two of them on the field, a brawl. And they didn't speak to each other after that for 37 years, including the dynasty. And yet they were able to put that aside and be a great team. And I found that in virtually all of the dynasties, there was not always kumbaya among the players. And the result of that is there were some bad things, there were fights and stuff, but people felt empowered to speak up. And that's another problem in our groups today, is we have meetings. But meetings is just really somebody talking with all the decisions being made before the meeting starts, and nobody really speaks up or says anything. And that's a problem, because there are people out there with great ideas and great solutions who, just because of the way the meetings are run and the way the culture is, they're afraid to speak up. And so that's another thing, is that kumbaya or culture or whatever, you got to factor that in, and you got to have an environment where people are allowed to speak up. So another dynasty team that is addressed in the book is the 1970s Cincinnati Reds, the Big Red Machine. Does anybody remember that team? Johnny Bench, Joe Morgan, Tony Perez, maybe one of the best teams of all time. And they were, in the 70s, were extremely good. And in 1970, they started the year 70-30, which is an amazing record of baseball. And they made it to the World Series, but they lost. In 1972, they went to the World Series, and they lost in the World Series. So they were doing very well, but they weren't accomplishing what they wanted to accomplish. And I believe something happened in 1973 that really turned the tide for them. And in 1973, they played the New York Mets in the National League Championship Series. And it was a very tough series, 5 games, best 3 out of 5. And Pete Rose was the focal point, as he always was back then. And he got in a brawl with a guy named Ken Harrelson at second base. Rose slid into him because he thought that the Mets had said things in the press about him, called him a choker. He was going to set the record straight, so that's how he did it. He slid hard into the shortstop. And his name was Bud Harrelson. And they got in a fight. And the crowd in New York just went crazy. And Rose goes out to left field in the next half inning, and he's pelted with everything from oranges and tomatoes, nuts and bolts. It's unbelievable, the stuff people bring to baseball games. But anyway, they threw it all at Rose in left field. They had to bring the players off the field. The crowd was so tough on him. And finally, they went back out, and they continued to play the game. And in the next game, Rose hits a home run in the 12th inning to win the game, and he runs around the bases going like this, and all that stuff came flying out of the stands again. So we get to Game 5, and the Mets are going to win the series. They're up 6-1 in the 9th inning, and the Reds know what's going to happen after the game. This crowd is going to be unruly, and they're going to come after their people. So the Reds had their wives and families in the stands behind the dugout. And they actually took them, they had them come down and go out through the dugout before the 9th inning to sort of protect them. So it was a pretty scary situation. And so to get to the 9th inning, the top of the 9th inning, again, the Mets are going to win. And this is what happens. 2 outs. I think beer sales were at an all-time high that day at Shea Stadium. Did anybody happen to see who was at first base when that last ball was hit? It was Pete Rose. So Pete Rose was out in the middle of all that mass of humanity. And Johnny Bench is in the dugout, and he says, "Everybody grab a bat." And everybody on the team grabbed a bat, and they went out on the field to retrieve their teammate, Pete Rose. And there was some rough stuff that happened out there. It never really got fully reported, but some people were hit, were injured. because the Reds were dead set on getting back their player, but they did. They got Rose back into the dugout. They went out after the game. The Mets fans had figured out which bus was the Reds bus, and they were almost tipping it over. It was just this crazy scene. But it's crisis. And my point here is there is opportunity in crisis. When you're facing a crisis, we're in a mini crisis right now, maybe a major crisis for your people. This is an opportunity. It's an opportunity that brings people together. And that's what happened to that Reds team, is they had been very, very good, but they weren't really yet a team. You'll hear baseball people say now they need to love each other. And I believe that. I believe that you need to be a great team, they've got to feel that way about their teammates. And the Reds became a team that day. And then they went on to win the World Series in 1975 and 1976, and are regarded today as one of the best dynasties of all time. But it's that crisis, it's that opportunity as a leader that you have with your team to get them together. Sometimes people step up that have never stepped up before, and again come up with ideas, or they do things, or they make a difference. And that team rises, and that team becomes what they can become. And it's a pretty fascinating thing to see it when it happens. But don't lose sight of that. When we're in these situations where, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? Nobody has power. We've got a deadline coming up in a week. What do you do? And just remember, instead of sort of a woe is me mentality, remember that there's an opportunity in crisis to really raise your team. So people ask me about this book, and they say, well, it's a book about dynasties. Isn't it really just about the New York Yankees? Because the New York Yankees have won 27 titles. They're the most successful sports franchise in the history of American professional sports. And there's actually 5 dynasties covered in the book on the New York Yankees. But the really interesting one is not sort of why that dynasty became great, but it's how they fell. What happened to them? And this dynasty was the early 1960s dynasty. Mickey Mantle, Whitey Ford, Roger Maris, and those players. And the Yankees actually, they'd been on a string where they'd won basically 20 out of 40 titles over 40 years, which is an amazing streak. They win the title in 1961. They win the title in 1962. In 1963, they go to the World Series and they're beaten by the Dodgers. In 1964, they go back to the World Series. They're beaten by the Cardinals. In 1965, they finished 6th place in the American League, which is virtually unheard of for Yankees. And in the next year, 1966, they finished 10th, last in the American League. And so they fell off a cliff. A great dynasty. What happened? And that's what people are interested in. And I think there's 3 basic reasons that they didn't continue on. They could have. Number one is they did not take advantage of an available talent of players. And what I mean by that is men of color, black players. The Yankees were very, very, very slow to integrate. And other teams, like the Dodgers, who beat them in '63, and the Cardinals, who beat them in '64, embraced diversity and embraced hiring Negro League players, black players, Latino players, and they became better. The teams became faster, the pitching became better, and they just were better as a team. And the Yankees just didn't. The Yankees we're going to do it our way. We've always done it this way. They had some really questionable reasons for why they didn't integrate, but they didn't. And that it cost them at the end of the day. So that's number one. Number two, they didn't change with the game. The game was changing in the early 60s. It became more of a pitching game, more of a game about defense. And so teams were out looking at pitchers. The Reds actually changed their surface to a faster surface, artificial turf. So it was a faster game that would suit these new players. These other teams did something. They changed with the game. The Yankees didn't change. They said, we're the New York Yankees. We've been doing this great for 40 years. We're just going to keep going as we have. But the third reason, and maybe the most interesting reason of all, is how they treated and how they handled their main superstar, Mickey Mantle. Mantle was a great player, one of the greatest center fielders of all time. Most people put him in their top 10. But Mantle was an alcoholic. And he had all the traits of an alcoholic, where he caused dysfunction on the team. He would, on one hand, be somebody's best friend, but the next day, you don't know how he's going to be, how he's going to feel. And before you know it, there's back chatting going on with management on which players should stay and which players should go. And that's a big problem in organizations. And the problem with the Yankees at that time, in the early 60s, is they weren't aligned. Their manager, their general manager, and their owner, which were the three sort of main parts of the leadership, they weren't on the same page. The team actually was bought by CBS, who didn't know anything about baseball. There was a general manager who really wasn't qualified to be a general manager, and Yogi Berra was the manager, who was Mickey Mantle's friend. And so the Yankees just didn't do anything about it. And what I do in the book is I compare that to the Yankees of 40 years before, and how they handled a very similar player named Babe Ruth. And Babe Ruth was probably regarded by most as the greatest player of all time. He had amazing years in the early 20s, probably the two best years of all, 1920 and 1921, that any offensive player ever had. But by 1925, Ruth was drinking. He was carousing. He came to spring training 64 pounds overweight. And the team they were just languishing in 7th place, 1925. And on August 29th, 1925, Ruth came into the clubhouse after being out all the night before. He came in after his teammates were already been in, dressed, and they were on the field. And Ruth still had his clothes on from the night before, including a big Panama hat. And the manager was a 5'4" guy named Miller Huggins, and he went up to Ruth and he said, "Ruth, you're suspended. Don't put on your uniform, and you're fined $5,000. So Babe Ruth exploded right there. He said, "You can't do this. You don't have the power to do this. I'm going to go to the owner. I'm going to go to the press, and I'm going to make sure that this doesn't happen." So he did that. He went to the owner, Jacob Rupert, and Rupert said, "No, you're suspended as long as Miller Huggins wants you to be suspended." He went to the press and said, "Miller Huggins is a lousy manager. He's the reason we're in 7th place." Jacob Rupert proactively went out into the press himself and said, "Babe Ruth will be suspended so long as Miller Huggins wants him to be suspended." They aligned. They stood up and said no. And Ruth was suspended. And he finally had to basically come back and beg for his job back and beg for his uniform. He had to apologize in front of the entire team. And it was a big moment for that franchise. And what Babe Ruth did after that season was something that I don't know if any player had ever done before. He went out and hired a personal trainer. And he got back in shape. And he came back in 1926 and 7 and 8, really 26 through 32. Ruth had the best 6 years that any player had ever had in history, even looking back from today. He averaged 50 home runs, 155 RBIs, and hit 347 over a 6-year period. So what's the point of all this? The point is there are bullies in our workplaces. There are people that are very talented. Usually they're top salespeople or they're rainmakers or whatever. And as it turns out, Ruth and Mantle were just about the same age when this happened. Ruth was 30, Mantle was 32. But it's the point in time where great baseball players kind of peak. And so, you know, there were bullies and they were pushing people around and felt like they could just run the organization. And that's what we have on our teams and groups sometimes. We have individuals that are really hitting their stride in their career. Their numbers are as high as they've ever been. And they stop following the rules. And they start speaking out of turn. And they start having back chats with employees about managers and all those dysfunctional things. And the point is, it's a real key moment for leadership when that happens. We got to stand up to that. We got to say no. We got to sit them down and say, this is going to stop. If it doesn't stop, you're out of here. And this is something that companies have a tough time with. And sometimes they bring me in to have the conversation. But they need to have the conversation. Because if they don't have the conversation and the person stays, that company will start losing people they want to keep. Ruth was a known carouser. He drank, and Mantle did the same thing. There's actually a story about Mantle where Mantle was drunk the night before. He came his handlers got him to the stadium. They got him out on the field for his first at bat, could barely stand up, and he swung as hard as he could and hit a 400-foot home run over the left field fence. And as he ran to first base, he just kept drifting out into right field. And they pan to the dugout, and the young guys on the team are all laughing. They couldn't believe it. This guy was their hero. And he was teaching them how to be a great player. You carouse, you drink, you don't follow the rules, but you could step it up on game day. And that was a problem. So bullying in the workplace, or not necessarily really bullying in the traditional sense, but just sort of not following the rules and kind of going their own way and not being a good teammate, that's a huge problem. So another issue, another thing I found on all these dynasty teams, they had one thing in common, is they had a great player who was sort of under the radar, and they weren't a star. They didn't want to be a star. They subordinated their game to the stars. They were not in the limelight, and they were comfortable not being in the limelight. But in huge games, when it was needed most, they would step up and make the catch or the throw or the hit. And think Yuli Gurriel back in the days of these last few years for the Astros. He's not on the team anymore, but he was that person that was not a star, but in key moments he would step up and do really well. And again, there were a lot of players that I met along the way. But really the most fascinating was a guy named Bobby Brown. It's not the 90s pop singer, but Bobby Brown, who played third base for the New York Yankees in the late 1940s and early 1950s. As I studied this team and read about their end-of-the-season runs and their World Series accomplishments, they actually won 5 World Series in a row between 1949 and 1953, the only team in baseball to ever do that. And during that era, I kept seeing this guy, Bobby Brown, would get up and get a huge hit in the World Series, game after game after game. And I'd never heard of him before. He wasn't an all-star. He was certainly not going to be in the Hall of Fame. He batted behind Joe DiMaggio, and so DiMaggio would often get walked, and Bobby Brown would be at the plate and would often, most of the time, would bring him in. And so I had to find out about Bobby Brown. Well, first of all, as of this day, Bobby Brown has the second highest batting average in World Series games, 439, which is an extraordinary batting average, second only to Big Papi Ortiz with the Boston Red Sox. And so the statistics were there. And he then, after he played, he retired early and became a cardiologist. He was going to medical school during the time he was playing baseball at Tulane. And so he had an arrangement with the team where he could come late. He would miss spring training every year. And then to make things up, on the other end, he would go to New Orleans hospitals over the holidays and work in the ER and deliver babies. I mean, he was an amazing person. And he retired at age 30 to go serve his medical residency in California. After that, he became a practicing cardiologist in Fort Worth for 25 years through 1994 when he retired at age 59. And then he was asked to be the president of the American League. And he was actually almost commissioner. It was a time when Bart Giamatti was appointed commissioner. And then later in life, he became George Bush's tennis partner. And it's just this amazing story. And he served in Korea. He was a battalion surgeon in Korea. And did all of these great things. And he was just an amazing player. I had to meet this guy, Bobby Brown. But as was the case with many players that I ran across in this project, they were very old or had passed away. Well, Bobby Brown, luckily, was still alive. He lived in Fort Worth. He was 94 years old. And I was lucky. Through a couple of contacts, I was able to get a hold of him, and he agreed to meet with me. And so I went up to Fort Worth and sat down with Bobby Brown for maybe the 4 most fascinating hours of my life. He told me Joe DiMaggio stories. He told me Mickey Mantle stories. He told me Jackie Robinson stories. He was a fascinating man. And he talked about the Yankee culture and why they were so good and how they always had a professional demeanor and there was no heckling. You didn't heckle on that team or you were out. I mean, that's just the way they were at that time. No arguing with umpires. And I kept trying to get him to talk about himself. And I said, look, you got up there in these World Series games and you came through each and every time. How did you do that? He said, I just swung as hard as I could, waited for a pitch to hit. You know, the standard baseball answer. He wouldn't talk about himself. And I finally got to the point where I was really pushing, and I knew that He was on probably one of the best high school teams of all time. He was the top prospect coming out of high school in the early 1940s. And I asked him about his high school team. He said, well, there was this guy named Sheehan who was really, really good. He was a pitcher. He almost always won. And he kind of looked at me in a way that it was different. I couldn't understand really what he was trying to say. He was older. I think he probably was starting to suffer from a bit of dementia. And so but his memory that day was very, very good. But he talked about this guy, Sheehan. And he also talked about a couple other guys, veterans that sort of helped him along the way. And he kind of gave me the same look with them. So I went and I looked up Sheehan, and it turns out that Sheehan was a fighter pilot in World War II. He was a Staff Sergeant Waist Gunner, 360th Bomber Squadron, 303rd Bomber Unit. And he was shot down over Germany on September 24th, 1944. Bobby Brown wanted me to write about Sheehan in the book. Bobby Brown wanted people to know about Sheehan and these two other guys, Bobby Maddox and Jimmy, can't remember his name. He wanted me to write about Jimmy Gleason. He wanted me to write about these guys. And so I looked up Sheehan. This is Sheehan right here. And I do this in these presentations because that's what Bobby Brown wanted. I spent 4 hours with him. He was very kind to me. He was a man of great integrity. He was a nice person. And even when he didn't feel so great late in life. And what I learned is that he was one of those leaders that become elite. They become the great person. They become the one that really made it for you, the one that spoke up for you or got you that position or put you in a place that was great for you. Those people are probably the best. And Bobby Brown was the best. He was a remarkable man, did great things, lived a life that was just as full as you could be. He passed away a couple of years ago in 2021. I went to his service in Fort Worth. And it was just fascinating, to hear the stories about him. His son, Pete, gave a eulogy, and he said when Bobby was older, they took his keys away from him. And so one day, Bobby came up to Pete and said, hey, I'm going to the dentist today. Or I went to the dentist today. And Pete said, you don't have keys. How did you get to the dentist? Bobby said, well, the dentist came and picked him up. That was Bobby Brown. That's the kind of reverence he got from people in life. So that experience alone made the book worthwhile. It was a very interesting project. I met some great people along the way. It's always about the people. Spent some time in the Baseball Hall of Fame Giamatti Library studying players, and it was just fantastic. It was my COVID project. I'd written the book in my head for a long time, but I put it down on paper during the COVID year. So rather than gain 15 pounds, that's what I decided to do. So I'm at a point where I'm going to open it up for questions, if anybody has any, on players or teams or the process of writing a book. Yes, sir.
So I know I live in Houston, but I'm a diehard Braves fan.
Yep.
So as you talk about the 90s, growing up in that environment was awesome, minus the World Series gap.
Yeah.
As you look at baseball today, and you look at how teams are approaching, really the new dynamic that baseball is post-COVID, what would you kind of say is the dynasties in the making now based off of your research in the past?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's tougher than ever to become a dynasty because of the number of rounds of playoffs. You have free agency, so players are moving all over the place. And it's just, there's more teams. It's tougher. I think the Dodgers are always a candidate. It's these teams that just continue to get great talent over and over and over again up through their system, and they're able to attract talent as free agents. So Braves are in that group, Dodgers, Astros. The Orioles look like a real contender with their young team. So those, and always the Yankees. Yeah.
Anybody else has a question? Yes.
Yes.
I'm not a baseball fan. I am a baseball widow.
Okay.
My husband is a lifelong Yankees fan, so he'll be very interested as well. Here's my question. Having watched or endured a number of games over the years, it seems to me that baseball has gotten
Sabermetrics is what you're talking about. And the question is really, what about all these numbers you see? Weighted runs created plus. Well, what does that mean? And we're inundated with these statistics now when we watch baseball games. And you're exactly right. It has become part of the game. Most teams now have analytics departments. I think they have to pay attention to it. But the human element, I think, always overrides it. And every year they come out with these new statistics. They claim that there's a catch percentage. So that when a ball is hit out in the outfield, they can tell us the percentage likelihood that ball will be caught. That's nonsense. They can't do that. So some of those statistics aren't really grounded in scientific fact, but they overwhelm people, and that's what I'm concerned about. Is on the broadcasts, you're just flooded with this stuff.
But if you translate that to business, sometimes an organization in your business as well, how many readers and what are the percentage of the opening at the page 3 to see my ad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas really it's the passion of what you're doing, and you got to keep that human element. I think Moneyball was a pretty good movie. I love baseball movies as well. And Moneyball was all about stats and how they took the Oakland A's based on stats, which was pretty interesting. But you can get overwhelmed with leadership in your organization, and you as a leader of your own business, you want statistical things, but those statistics will take care of themselves if you get right to the heart of the matter of your employees and treat your employees correctly and give them the drive to do better themselves. I mean, bottom line is sales cures everything. Realistically, right?
Yeah.
And so does championship.
Well, and the people have to understand the statistics. You have to help your team understand why you're doing this. Because if they just see a bunch of numbers and they don't understand them, they won't buy in, and it may not be as helpful.
All right. Did we have one question? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Do you think we'll see anyone hit for the Triple Crown?
Boy, that's a tough one. Cabrera did it a few years ago after a long drought. The Triple Crown in baseball is leader in home runs, RBIs, and batting average. And it's very, very difficult to do. Players like Ted Williams used to do it back in the day. Yes, I think we will see it, but it's a random baseball thing. You just never know when it's going to happen. And it's going to take somebody that's healthy the entire year, somebody who has a great power year but also gets on base, it gets hits. It's a real tough thing to do, but probably yes. But I'm not going to try and predict when it's going to happen.
I tell you, it's been very interesting to hear all the metaphors and everything, but if you're not a fan or if you've endured the fanship, I've got to put a plug out there. I get to announce women's softball at the high school at Chargers, and I've become a real fan of women's softball, and I've actually I'm watching the college girls play. And I understand there's a pro league coming. There's a women's league out of San Antonio or Austin called the Texas Smoke. And if women's league and softball would start coming like women's basketball in one respect, I'm in, because those girls play with heart, passion. They're good. And if you can throw a ball 70 miles an hour underhanded, I put you up against any major leaguer. Let's see if they can do that, right?
It's amazing.
What about Ted's going to be out there? If you'd like to see his book or talk to him personally, ask some more questions, get a picture with him. He'll be out front for a few minutes after. Ted, I want to say thank you very, very much.
It's been a pleasure.
And hang on. I have a coffee cup, in the dugout. You can put whatever you want in it.
Okay.
I'll do players don't know what's in there. And then there's also some of those candies in there for you too.
Nice.
So I hope you enjoy those.
I appreciate
and
that.
I really appreciate
Yeah,
you
it's a
taking
pleasure.
the time.
Thank you very much.
And your team. Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
Okay.
God bless you. Okay, I do want to put out there real quick for those that don't know, we're just a bit over, but today is July the 10th. And today, in 1808, Churchill Fulshear was born. Junior was born. And so he would have been 216 years old today, but that's the namesake of our town. And I've just posted something on our Facebook page about it. But it's kind of interesting, I think, something to think about. as we go with our town. Does anybody have anything they want to bring up or have something important they'd like anybody to know about? I appreciate you being here today. Grab some of that Whataburger. Take it with you. I'm sure nobody would turn. They're coming. They're going to have it at the table. There she is holding 2 boxes of taquitos. Oh, well, okay. Either way. So grab yourself something that you can heat them up in the microwave. Trust me, I've done it. All right. God bless every one of you. Thank you so much, and we'll love to see you at the next event. See y'all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.